Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name's Lisa Rowland. I'm event manager at Charity Digital and I'll be your host for today's webinar and would like to give you all a warm welcome. Today's webinar, How to Get Started with Web3 and AI, will be delivered by Helen, Managing Director at Seashell Collective. This webinar will give you the tools and information that you need to kickstart your Web3 journey by showcasing charity case studies and offering advice and tips on best practices. Before handing over to Helen, I want to share a few house rules. This session will be recorded, meaning that the recording of the session, the presentation in PDF format, and other resources will be made available to you within a week of this live stream. So don't worry if you miss anything, you can definitely catch up at a later date. We love our webinars to be as interactive as possible, so please do feel free to add your comments and share your experience and top tips in the chat section, as we'd love to hear from you. Also, feel free to ask lots of questions throughout the session by posting these in the Q&A section, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. I will be addressing these questions to Helen at the end of the webinar, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. If there are any particular questions that you'd like answered, you can upvote these within the Q&A section of the Zoom. Finally, if you do encounter any technical issues throughout the live stream, just let us know in the chat and we'll do all that we can to get back to normal as soon as possible. But without further ado, I will hand over to Helen.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and welcome everyone. Thank you for giving up an hour of your time to spend with me talking about Web3 and AI. So I just wanted to start off by telling you a little bit more about me. So I run Seashell Collective. We do digital marketing for charities and purpose-led businesses. And I also have the great privilege of being a writer for Charity Digital, which means I get to talk to lots of you about what you're doing with digital and share it with the rest of the sector through articles. A few months ago, I realized that there were so many new emerging technologies and I didn't know loads about them. So I really started a learning journey with clients that I work with through writing pieces for Charity Digital. And what I really wanted to do today is share what I've learned with you as a consultant and a freelance writer. And I really hope it will be helpful for you to kind of get started with your own journey around Web3 and AI. Just a little plug for Seashell Collective. We are a collection of digital experts that we bring kind of freelancers together to help you meet your digital marketing needs. Our main focuses are on digital marketing strategy, content and community management. And basically, because we're a collection of freelancers rather than an agency, we give you the kind of agency experience at freelancer prices. So moving on to the main topics for today. First of all, I want to talk about Web3. And what I'm going to try and do is give you some definitions, some explainer content, and then look at practical examples of how this is kind of playing out in the charity sector. So lots of you probably will remember Internet 2.0, or the second version of the internet, the second iteration of the internet, and Web3 is kind of the third version of the internet. So what changed between the original internet and Internet 2.0 is that we started to see more kind of dynamic websites. So a great example of that is Google, whether you think about standard Google or Google Maps. So you will put in a query and the website will evolve and become dynamic to show you the answer to your query. In Web 2.0, we also saw the rise of user-generated content, so particularly through social media. And Web 3 is really just this kind of next iteration. But I think one of the things you have to understand before you think about Web 3 is Industry 4. So sorry, I know there's like lots of terms coming at you now. And so please do put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll come back to those. So Industry 4.0 is basically the fourth industrial revolution, and it's characterized by three things. So that's the Internet of Things, and you will probably be very familiar with some tools that are used in the Internet of Things. Maybe on your wrist today, you might have an Apple Watch. So it's a piece of hardware that is internet enabled. It's tracking data, so how many steps you take, it tracks your sleep information, and it transmits that data via the internet to a central database that can be queried. So I used to work for Hospice UK a few years ago, and even at that time, the hospices were already exploring how we could use the Internet of Things in telehealth. So with the hospice at home service, looking at how blood pressure cuffs or weighing scales could be used to in an internet enabled way, where the data was transmitted back to a central database that could be queried by a clinician, so that clinical interventions could be planned. So these things are already happening. There's also the Internet of Systems is a fundamental to Industry 4.0. And that can be as basic as your CRM system, your database integrating with your email marketing system. So it's integrating all of these internet enabled systems, but it can also be around sort of systems thinking, which I think is really fascinating for our sector. So that's where, for example, you might have a number of charities working on the same issue. They will have differences. They might have different areas of specialism or be based in different geographies, but they're working in the same system. So it's thinking about how do we have this systems-led approach to solving the issues we're working on. And a nice example of it is UNICEF created a period tracking app called Oki. It's open source, and that means that the basic technology for the period tracking app can be adapted, and this, the cover and the information can be changed for different cultural contexts. So obviously we know for young girls who are beginning to menstruate, there are a huge variety of cultural contexts and issues to take into account. But this systems-led approach, thinking about what are the basic needs and how can they be differentiated within the system, and how can we collaborate together, really means that you've got kind of this systems-led approach and systems thinking for this same issue. Another thing that is part of Industry 4 is robots. Sounds very futuristic, but actually there are also robots being used in the sector already. Starlight Children's Foundation have developed a robot called AV1, and it's basically a really small kind of portable robot which can be placed where a child with long-term illness, who may be in an extended hospital stay, it can be placed in the environment that child's missing out on. So it might be their classroom, it might be a friend's birthday party, it might be a theatre performance or a gig that they really wanted to get to, and that robot can take in audio-visual data and transmit it to a tablet that the child's holding on to, so they can have the experience of that environment. It allows them to interact with the environment as well. So really interesting thinking about how things are developing in industry more broadly and how that's impacting our sector, and then thinking about how the internet is changing and how that's impacting our sector too. So let's have a look at the kind of 4 main principles of Web3. And I'm going to come on to give you some really specific examples about each of them, or examples that incorporate a number of them. But the first principle is decentralisation. So the third iteration of the internet is decentralised. There's no kind of central power controlling it, or a small number of central powers controlling it, as we kind of see at the moment. So we'll see how this plays out with things like decentralized autonomous organizations, which I'll go on to explain a bit more, but also in terms of how some of the other aspects of Web3 operate. So things like blockchain also operate in a decentralized way. And I'll come on to explain blockchain a bit more and look at some specific examples. Another element of Web3 is tokenomics. So these are token-based economies where you get coins or tokens in exchange for desired behaviours. So this is very familiar in my household at the moment, because I have a daughter in year 4 who's about to take her times table test, her national times table test after half term, and she uses a program called TTRS, Times Table Rockstars, to practice. And within that program, she is rewarded with coins every time she actually does some practice of her times tables, and she can use those coins to update her avatar in the program and give it a new hat or a new outfit or whatever it is. New hairstyle often is the case with her. And if you if you play yourself or you have children who play Roblox, then you'll also be familiar with the currency there, Robux. So again, it's these tokens that have value, sometimes outside of a Web3 environment and sometimes just within it, and that they are exchanged for these desired behaviors. And then the fourth kind of principle is the metaverse. So the metaverse is basically a virtual world where users can interact with the Web3 environment and with all of these different sort of principles and the ways in which they play out. So let's come on to look at some practical examples. I love this one. This is Honey Badger's NFT. It's an NFT project, which is an example of decentralisation, tokenomics, and the blockchain. So an NFT is a cryptographic token. NFT stands for non-fungible token. So you can see here, this is my non-fungible token, my NFT that I've purchased as part of this project. It is totally unique. It can't be replaced with anything else. NFTs are actually seen as the future of fine art. They can be copied, but the original ownership of this NFT, so that I am the owner of this NFT, is recorded on the blockchain. By purchasing this NFT, and it's one of 10,100 randomly generated NFTs as part of this project, which are all in the image of the fearless and unapologetic honey badger, which I love. By purchasing that NFT, it has granted me membership of the Honey Badgers DAO. So a DAO is this decentralized autonomous organization, and they are basically grassroots internet-based organizations that are collectively owned and managed by their members. So as a member now, I collectively own and manage the DAO for Honey Badgers. The rules for DAOs are encoded as a computer program. All decisions are made collectively and they're not influenced by government. And so when I've purchased this NFT and got membership to the DAO, 10% of my purchase has funded a grassroots activist. And these activists apply directly to the DAO for funding. And there's a great diagram on the site, which I've linked to here, which shows you how it all works. So you can see that you purchase the NFT, you hold the NFT and automatically join the Honey Badgers DAO, this decentralized autonomous organization, this collective of members. The DAO votes in a 10-person DAO leadership team. Global change makers fill out the grant application directly to the DAO. They explain how they would change their local community with a Honey Badgers grant. The leadership that has been voted in here vets those projects and performs a risk evaluation over 3 weeks. And then based on that risk evaluation and the vetting process, the full DAO membership votes on which change maker to fund. The change maker gets their funding and everybody follows their journey to see how they improve their community. And then you go back to the start. I mean, I find that absolutely fascinating. It's like the charity sector reimagined in the Web3 environment. But I think this is a really great example of an NFT project. But I've also been approached through Charity Digital about writing about an NFT project that was tackling homelessness. And honestly, the kind of copy and the approach that had been used really made me just wince. And the terminology that was used to talk about people experiencing homelessness, the lack of thought around barriers to entry for a project that was taking place in a Web3 environment was quite shocking to me. So I think there's so many opportunities, not necessarily with a project like this, but with others, for charities to share their expertise with NFTs and for NFTs to work with charities to to meet their philanthropic aims. And so yeah, it's just a really interesting development. I've got another example here, which is a more traditional way that charities can benefit from NFT projects. And this is with the Edinburgh Dog and Cat Homes. I interviewed David Mitchell, who's their cryptocurrency and digital fundraising manager, who's super interesting. And they had worked with an NFT project called Dogs Unchained by the K9 Collective. This is a project with philanthropic aims, but the philanthropic element of it is not delivered within that NFT project. So they're looking to partner with an appropriate charity to fulfill those philanthropic aims. So the Edinburgh Dog and Cat Home received a donation of $5,000 from the project. And as cats and dogs are a really big part of internet culture, arts-based NFTs representing cats and dogs have a really natural fit with charities like the Edinburgh Dog and Cat Home. So it's worth thinking about, with sort of an NFT-based project where there is this kind of artwork, what sorts of projects might be a great fit with your organisation. One of the things that David said, which I think is a great tip, is that one of the reasons he thinks they've started to benefit from these projects is that they are kind of crypto friendly, as he described it. So they have the ability to accept cryptocurrencies as for donations. And they also have a page on their site which talks about some of the projects that they've worked with already, and talks about their approach to crypto philanthropy, and it just cuts down those barriers for NFT projects looking to work with charities. There's also an amazing organization called Philanthrop3. If you go to my Twitter handle, which is @SeashellSocials, it's linked at the end of this, I've got a list on there of organizations and individuals who are working in kind of Web3 and AI in relation to charities, so they're sort of linked there. But the Philanthrop3 project, which Jane Curtis, who some of you may know, is involved with, has been set up to bring together NFT project founders and charities so that they can learn from each other. So that's a few examples of sort of decentralization, tokenomics, and blockchain all being kind of used simultaneously. And I've got another kind of example of blockchain. And as promised, I wanted to kind of talk you through a bit more about how blockchain works in reality. So I found this great diagram on tibco.com, who work in kind of using blockchain in supply chain for security and visibility, as you can see here. But they've got this great diagram, which I really think helps kind of bring it to life. So blockchain was first established for the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. So every time a Bitcoin transaction takes place, it's added to a block, which means that every single coin is accounted for because its progress is always marked on the blockchain. All of the blocks are stored on a ledger, and that ledger is accessible via nodes, so that's sort of individual computers or systems of network systems of computers that have access to that ledger, and that ledger is replicated on every single node. So if someone tries to change it on one node, the other kind of nodes resist, which makes it quite secure. And the way in which transactions are verified also helps to make it quite secure. I won't go into the details of that because there's two different systems and they get a bit complicated. And this same principle has used for my honey badger, who you met a few slides ago, and other NFTs. So every time an NFT is purchased, it's marked on the blockchain. If I were to go on and sell my NFT or trade it in any way, that would also be marked on the blockchain. And it's really interesting to think about how this system, it's used in currency, it's used in NFTs, but how else could it be used, in supply chains, for example. And it really made me think about my time at Human Rights Watch, when we worked on a campaign called Behind the Bling, which was looking at the hidden cost of the jewelry sector. So the precious gem jewelry industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, but because of the way it operates and its supply chain, it benefits directly from labour rights abuses that are happening in sort of mining communities. and that have even resulted in the deaths of children. Sometimes parts of the supply chain are funding armed groups in wars that are causing immense civilian suffering. They can also be having environmental impacts in terms of soil pollution and water pollution within mining communities. And companies are able to kind of hide behind an organisation that's actually based in London called the Responsible Jewellery Council, who have sort of standards for supply chain responsibility that these companies sign up to. But there's no requirement for total transparency because these companies say that it's impossible to track the supply chain because might be thousands of tiny mines that come together through various different sort of suppliers and traders along a supply chain. So it's impossible to determine where one gem came from. But just think about if we applied blockchain technology to that supply chain, and we were able to trace where every single gem came from, even if it came in through a big batch that had been combined with others, you'd still know that some element of that batch had come from a mine where, one of those rights issues is being played out. And the end supplier, the retailer, then has a responsibility to think about, well, should I be retailing this jewelry product, when I know what has happened in order for it to be created? And they can refuse to do that and then apply that economic pressure down the supply chain. So it's really fascinating to think about how blockchain technology could be used outside of currency to solve some of the fundamental problems we're trying to work on as a sector. I found another really interesting example of how blockchain's being used in fundraising. So there's a platform called Alice, which is based on blockchain. It's a blockchain funding platform, and it basically links donations to impact. So when you set up a project, so a fundraising appeal, you define the impact metrics of whatever it is that you're trying to fund. So how you would measure your impact, and then you connect Alice with the relevant data sources. So you could connect them with sort of publicly available data, and also with your CRM. So it integrates with Salesforce, for example, which I know a lot of charities use. And basically, donations that are made to the project are frozen until Alice can see that the impact metrics have been met by sort of monitoring that data. And it uses blockchain to track each individual donation. So, for example, they had a partnership with St Mungo's trying to bring 15 people out of homelessness, and they could, every time one person had kind of made progress and the impact metrics had been hit, they would be able to say to a number of donors who had funded the amount that helped that one person, yes, your donation has now been unfrozen, and because the impact has been met, and connect them with the individual story of the person who had been brought through out of homelessness. And so it's just a really fascinating way of addressing something that I've written about a little bit for Charity Digital, which I think is a huge issue for the sector, and it's the kind of declining amount of public trust in charities. And one of the things that's mentioned in the Charity Commission report is that a lot of donors don't feel that they really see the impact of their donations. So it's interesting to see how blockchain can help to get past that. And then moving on to some examples of the metaverse. So the metaverse is probably the area that's most in its sort of infancy. There are a few corners of the metaverse that have been created, and the idea is that these corners of the metaverse will pop up and eventually kind of merge together, and you'll be able to move seamlessly through these different kind of pockets of the metaverse, which is decentralized and owned by different developers and organizations. The best example I found of one that's very charity oriented is Betterverse. So in Betterverse, you buy an NFT tree, 95% of your donation goes to charity partners. So currently those are tree planting organisation. You watch your virtual tree grow over 5 ages. You choose where to plant it in the Metaverse, so this kind of Metaverse environment that you can actually see it in the virtual world. And you can see sort of on the image here, it shows you the impact of that tree planting, so that the amount of carbon removed, which organisation it's been planted with, and where the tree has been planted in the real world. So the virtual world in this case mirrors the impact in the real world. It represents the real world impact of your donation. And they plan to extend this kind of Metaverse environment beyond trees to other NFT projects that would be, other areas of work, other issues that would be represented by NFTs in the virtual world, that sort of reflects the real world impact of donations. So yeah, really, really fascinating. But because the Metaverse is in its infancy, the example that we're given a lot is to look to the gaming world, to really think about how things might play out in the Metaverse for charities and other organisations. So I've got a couple of gaming examples to give you that give you a sense of what the future might hold. This is a great one on the Sophie site. And it's a partnership between the Breast Cancer Research Foundation over in the States and a games developer called Blizzard Games. The Blizzard suggested that they could, as part of this partnership, create a skin to be developed and sold in return for donations to BCRF. A skin is basically a visual update for a game avatar. So in this case, the game was Overwatch, and the character that they were creating this skin for was the character Mercy, and you can see her over here in her kind of pink skin that was developed as part of the partnership. It was sold as a limited edition for 2 weeks at $15 per skin, and 14 of Overwatch's star players did a live stream on Twitch to support the campaign. About 800,000 people bought the skin, and the campaign raised $12.7 million. And this is, BCRF are not a huge organization in the States, so this was by far and away the biggest corporate partnership they'd ever had. So it just goes to show the kind of potential of working in these Metaverse type environments, within gaming, and how what's working well there is probably a very good indication of what's going to work well in the Metaverse. And one of the gaming universes that is most likened to what the Metaverse is going to look and feel like is Roblox, because it's decentralized. There isn't, unlike with Mercy here and Overwatch, there isn't a kind of one developer that owns it. It's lots of different developers creating games within this virtual environment. So I've got an example of a partnership there between Great Ormond Street Hospital Children's Charity and the Roblox game Adopt Me. Gosh are one of our lovely clients. We do community management for them, and this partnership slightly knocked us for six because there was a very rapid increase in activity on social media as a result of the partnership, which was amazing, but slightly shocking to kind of wake up to one morning. Gosh partnered with Adopt Me. In 2022, the game averaged 160,000 concurrent players. It was created by Uplift Games, and it's one of the most successful games on Roblox. The partnership basically involved an update on the game that introduced this character Patty, who you can see here, who's a therapy dog. Gosh also used therapy dogs within the hospital, so really amazing connection with the cause there. Patty set the users of the game, the players, a task that they had to complete. And then when they completed that task, they were able to adopt their own therapy dog, because that's the purpose of the game, that you adopt different pets and you look after them, and you can kind of upgrade them, and you can also trade them. And the same thing happened with Patty here. You could purchase your own a therapy dog, and access your own therapy dog, and then upgrade and trade it along with all of your other pets. As part of the partnership, Uplift made a $50,000 donation, which supported 2,000 hours of play team time at Gosh. And I think that decision was around not looking to kind of generate fundraising from an audience that is quite young. The players of Adopt Me are quite young, and kind of the ethics around that. So I thought it was an interesting approach to partnership. But what the partnership did generate, aside from this donation, was 10 to 15,000 new followers on TikTok pretty much overnight. And interestingly, they were kind of a much younger audience, and they included some existing and former patients from Gosh. So it was really interesting to see how this kind of younger audience and potentially kind of future donors were accessed through this partnership. Yeah, so I think we're going to come on to the next section, but I think there are kind of 4 things that you could get started with straight away with Web3. Strategically, thinking about a decentralized approach. There's so much to learn from that Honey Badgers setup. How can we better involve donors and the communities that we're serving in our decision making and in the way we run? I think there's a lot to kind of think about from the way that Web3 is evolving that's relevant to the sector. Number 2, could blockchain play a role in the problem that you're trying to solve on the issue that your organization works on? And number 3, being crypto friendly so that you can really benefit from NFT projects. And number 4, exploring partnerships. That just because it is possible to develop your own NFT project or develop your own corner of the metaverse, it doesn't mean that it needs to be your start point. There's so much success already from this partnership approach, and thinking about how you can work together and collaboratively with NFT projects within metaverse spaces and with gaming developers that could be kind of really mutually beneficial. So 4 kind of practical ways that you can get started with embracing Web3. So now we're going to go on to talk about AI. And I thought before we kind of get into AI, we should probably also think about how Web3 and AI interact. So this is my very basic equation for what that looks like. So they're basically connected by through speed. So AI is really helping Web3 to advance at a much quicker pace than it might have done otherwise. But let's think about what AI actually means. So this is a really kind of simplified way of looking at it. You take a large volume of data, referred to as big data, and you put that through a machine learning algorithm. So a machine learning algorithm is set up to perform a task and then learn from the results of that task so that it continually improves. I've put it in a black box here because it's referred to as kind of black box learning. We don't really understand how the algorithms are learning in the way that they are learning, and then that algorithm will will give you an output. And the thing that's happened recently, which has caused this kind of explosion in AI tools, is that ChatGPT has been kind of put over the top of big data from the internet and machine learning algorithm, so that rather than having to be a developer to put together that algorithm and get the output that you want, you can use a chatbot, so ChatGPT, to provide a prompt, which then kind of does this bit for you. So I actually asked ChatGPT to define AI for us, and this is what it had to say. AI, or artificial intelligence, refers to the development of computer systems that can perform tasks typically requiring human intelligence. That's this bit. It involves creating algorithms and models that enable machines to learn from data. So from this big data they're being fed. So they do that by recognizing patterns, making decisions, and solving problems. AI already exists in applications that you'd be familiar with already, like voice assistants, well, self-driving cars you may not be familiar with apart from the news, and personalized recommendations on websites. So by stimulating human-like thinking and learning processes, AI aims to enhance efficiency, accuracy, and automation in various domains, ultimately improving our daily lives and transforming industries. Well, an AI bot would say that, wouldn't it? But let's think about that concept and see how it's being played out in a really practical way in our sector. So I put a call out on social media a couple of weeks ago to ask people how they were using AI at their charities. And these are some of the things that people told me about. I'm also writing an article about it, so there'll be a bit more detail in that. That's due out towards the end of the month, beginning of June. But I spoke to Tim Todhunter, who's head of public fundraising at Crohn's and Colitis UK, and he told me that they are using AI with their fundraising appeals. So he told me about one tool, which is this one here, a fundraising copy. So for this tool, you develop the core copy for your appeal, you put it into the tool, and it will structure your core copy into using kind of standard appeal copywriting techniques, and it will structure it into the different formats that you might need, whether that's an email, a letter, an outer, all of these different things. It will do kind of automatically for you. They've used this a little bit, but mainly they've been using the new Bing, as it's called. So that's Microsoft's integration of Bing, their search engine, with ChatGPT. And so they've used that at various stages for their spring raffle. And they haven't got any results from the appeal yet because it only dropped a couple of weeks ago or a week ago. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. But this is one of the ways that AI is being used, is to develop fundraising appeals. I also spoke to Diane Hall at Evolve3, who's recently done a webinar about this, which you might be able to get the recording of. I think it'd be really great to look up. She's using AI to write funding bids for small charities. So she's mainly using ChatGPT, but interestingly, she told me about how she's her process for sort of checking what ChatGPT creates and sort of modifying it to be ready to submit. So she gets all of the information from the charities she works with about their projects and everything she might need for a funding application. And then she puts it through ChatGPT to ask ChatGPT to create a first draft in the format that's required by the funder. And she says this has been an absolute game changer. What she does with that first draft is, of course, as a copywriter, kind of goes through and works on it so that she feels happy with it. But she also puts it through two programs. So she puts it through one called Q-Test to test for plagiarism, and she tries to reduce that to kind of 15% or less. It will highlight which bits it thinks are plagiarized, and she said 15% is acceptable because often the software will pick up a sentence as plagiarized when it's just a really commonly used phrase, so it's not actually plagiarized. And then she also uses an AI checker called Copy Leaks, because she's aware that some funders are starting to look at funding applications and work out whether any AI has been used. She doesn't know necessarily whether, using AI would mean that they were less likely to get the grant, but it is something that funders are starting to look at. So she uses Copy Leaks and updates the text so that it looks like it's 80 to 90, well, it is 80 to 90% human sort of generated. I think one of the main things that is kind of picked up is sentence structure, because it can produce quite complex, lengthy sentences, whereas as a copywriter, you'd be looking for, much kind of punchier phrases and language that was really, really accessible. And when she's got kind of a final draft for one funder, another funder might want, the application to be in a very different format. So she gave an example of an application form versus a letter, and she was able to feed the final version of the application form back into ChatGPT to get it to create a letter for the other funder. So again, sort of total game changer. Another area that AI is being used is for content generation, for image content generation. And I know that this is a headache for lots of charities because it's something that we help them with. So I spoke to James Edge, who works in comms in the sector, but is also a volunteer at Apimondia, which is the International Federation of Beekeepers, in case you didn't know. And they have been using AI image generators in some of their social media content. So you can see an example on the left here where they've used crayon.com to create an AI image. They've also tested out Hotpot, which is, he's given me an example here in this tweet. And Midjourney is another tool that's being used. Hotpot and Midjourney are paid tools, and crayon.com is free. It's really interesting, the output from these tools, and I'm actually testing Midjourney myself this week for a weekly newsletter that I write that I'll mention at the end. The images that it creates, I think, as you can see here, and I'll show you these Midjourney ones, are really kind of stylized. They're almost kind of ethereal, and they definitely give you a little bit of this uncanny valley. I don't know if you ever heard that term, but it kind of means where something is like human but not quite. You know, there's something ever so slightly uncanny valley about these images, and these actually come from Mark Phillips, who some of you may know, who asked Midjourney to create images of different people in charities, different roles. So you've got a head of PR, a head of community fundraising, and a head of data. So yeah, very, very amusing. But interestingly, he said he had to prompt Midjourney to consider diversity, otherwise every single image came out as an older white man with a beard. So definitely sort of issues there. I've got a few other examples of tools that people have shared with me that they haven't necessarily used themselves, because this is emerging so quickly, but just a few for you to be aware of. One is from the States nonprofit operating system. So Clay Buck recommended this one to me. One of the issues that AI may have for the charity sector is not knowing the appropriate terms and language for the specific issue that you work on. Obviously, it's a really important area of expertise. So what has happened with this tool is that specific knowledge banks have been created by fundraising experts that are relevant to different kind of subsectors within the nonprofit sector. So like the arts sector, or faith charities, for example. And that means that the information that is being drawn into the AI is more tailored to the sector that you work in, and tailored with that expert knowledge, which has been kind of directed by a human. I've got another tool to talk about that does something similar, but basically you specify the sector that you work in, and the tool can help you to create, with some of your standard core copies, blog posts, email appeals, social media content, thank you notes, but all created in a way that is using kind of language that's appropriate to your sector. Another tool that was recommended was developed by Creature Ad Agency. So they're behind many of the big successful campaigns that you may have seen in the sector or been involved with. So they've just done the Woodland Trust Plant More Trees campaign, for example. This tool is just being used with clients, but I thought it was really interesting to understand, how this is being used agency side as well. So they've got two AI tools, Impala, that generates market tested creative propositions, and Magic Ant, which produces creatives for those campaign propositions. So it's just taking a lot of that workload and the time away from sort of creative directors and designers to be able to get through that propositions and testing phase more quickly, which is really fascinating. And then the last tool that I wanted to talk to you about is Charity Excellence, which many of you may be aware of. If not, do check it out. Ian McClintock, who runs Charity Excellence, is actually launching a whole kind of AI strategy on the 2nd of June. But it centers on these, he's got a bunny thing. He centers on these bunnies, tech bunnies that he's created, which are basically kind of chatbots, bunny chatbots, that can help you with anything. And it's really interesting. Do look at his strategy page when it launches on the 2nd of June. But it's basically talking about you can ask the bunnies anything, and they get their answers from these knowledge banks that Ian's created. So the knowledge banks come from things like web scraping the Charity Commission website. So if you're setting up a charity and you have a question about how to do that, the bunny can go to that knowledge bank, look through the entire site content in a matter of seconds and come back with the answer. And because it's AI, it learns from the accuracy of the answer. There's also human intervention, because if it's not sure of the best answer, it might create 3 answers and take them to Ian, who will say, actually, that's the best answer. So it learns from Ian's kind of expertise as well. And he's got a lot of these technologies kind of working together for things like bid writing, for example. So if you ask the bunny to help you write a fundraising bid for a funder, it would ask you a series of questions. So it would get all the information it needed from you about the project and about your organization. It would then put that information through ChatGPT, and it would create you a first draft of your funding bid for you to then go away and edit. So it's bringing a lot of these kind of AI technologies together in order to help you with the kind of problems that you are having, the tasks that are particularly time consuming or that you don't have sort of expertise in. So finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about the risks of AI. I think a lot of people worry that the risk is that AI is going to take over all of our jobs. And I personally don't think that is the main issue. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've worked in the charity sector nearly 20 years, and I have never got to a point where I thought, yeah, even if an amazingly fast like robot came in and did everything that I need to do for the next year, we wouldn't have solved the issue that I was working on. We absolutely wouldn't have. So there's always more to do, which I don't need to tell you. And I don't think that's the main issue. I do think AI, and I think a lot of the people that I've interviewed had said this over the past week, that they think AI is speeding things up. It is making tasks like copyright writing, repurposing content into different formats, idea generation even much faster. But the big risk for AI is that data that you put in. That's where the real problem is, because you get out what you put in. So a couple of examples of that, and I think I've touched on one already. So this picture here is of Joy Bolamwini, who founded the Algorithmic Justice League. She was studying for her master's at MIT, and she was looking at facial recognition software. She started doing some testing to test the hypothesis for her for her master's, and she discovered that the facial recognition software was racist. It basically was not recognizing her face as a Black woman. And she started to look into this a bit more and realized that, a bit like ChatGPT is being used as the basis for lots of AI tools, there was one kind of software that was being used as the basis for most of the world's facial recognition tools, and it had not been tested on enough people of color, so it wasn't recognizing people of color. So that bias from the data that was being used to train the AI was then built into the output, and that is the real danger. And you can see it in the again, the same issue cropping up, although bias could be around anything, around gender, around age, or whatever it is. But when Mark Phillips asked Midjourney to create images of fundraisers and other charity sector workers, they were all white men with beards until he prompted it to consider race. So the real danger is, what data are we putting into AI, and what are the implicit biases in that data? So been through a lot today, lot of information. I hope there's a lot of questions. But what I've also done for you, which is going to come out after this session, is put together a charity digital reading list. There's loads of amazing information and articles on Charity Digital, written by colleagues and by me. And so I put a list of like recommended articles that if you want to dig into some of these areas a bit more, you could read. And I'm also going to put in a little plug for my weekly newsletter, Techsperiments, where basically we test a digital tool so that you don't have to, because I know you do not have time to be testing all these new tools as they come out. So we do it for you, and let you know the results and any recommendations on how you could use these tools at your charity. You can sign up through bit.ly/Seashell Collective. And if you sign up, you even get a free social media strategy template. And then just to finish, here are all my contacts. I'd love to stay connected with you. You can reach me on Twitter, LinkedIn, my website's there. I've also got a blog on the website where anything that I've written for Charity Digital is also kind of shared a few weeks after it goes on the site. So yeah, please do keep in touch, and please do let me know how you are using Web3 and AI, because I'd really love to write about it.
Great, thank you so much, Helen. That was so insightful and so helpful to see all of those case studies as well. Sometimes it can feel a bit overwhelming, all the technology changes all the time. So it's nice to see charities using it and using it successfully. So hopefully that's kind of inspired some of the watchers today as well. So we have got some questions, so we'll dive straight in. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions. So the first one is from Daniela, and it says, how can charities ensure they only work with legit NFTs and are not using those that could potentially be a scam to then build the scams, the ones that are scams, into a respectable image? So yeah, how do you know you're using legit NFTs?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question. I think organizations that are kind of brokering these relationships between NFT projects and charities can be really, really valuable. So like Philanthrop3, so do check them out. And there's lots of advice on their site as well about how to start these relationships with NFT projects from the charity side and from the sort of NFT side. So I think do read all of that advice. But I think it's just really having detailed conversations about what the NFT project's philanthropic aims are. Are they delivering those philanthropic, we saw those two different versions. Is it like Honey Badgers where they're going to be delivering those philanthropic aims within the project, in which case is the charity's role to kind of advise how best to do that given their experience of the issue, or are they looking to the charity to deliver the philanthropic element of the project, and in that case that's under your control anyway, and the decision making around how that happens is yours, and whether that funding is then restricted or unrestricted, that's you're in kind of control of that conversation. But I think it is that collaborative approach and looking to support each other, the NFT projects and charities supporting each other, rather than kind of gatekeeping. Obviously, if there is an issue, like the project I referenced that was around homelessness, that even to someone who has worked with charities that work on homelessness but not kind of for one, there were a lot of red flags, and so I said no, I don't think that we're at the stage where we'd cover a project like this. I think there's some things that you could learn. I signposted them to Philanthrop3, trying to help them on their journey, but just recognizing those red flags.
Great, thank you very much. So the next one is from David, and it says, Bitcoin's implementation of blockchain involves a solving of complex mathematical problems to ensure the integrity of the ledger. This process uses a vast amount of energy and is incompatible with global climate change endeavours. Are these philanthropic implementations of blockchain climate friendly?
Well, it's a great question, and I'm sure the person who wrote it, who sort of has these has that knowledge already, knows about the kind of proof of work moving to proof of stake in the kind of currency sector, so between Bitcoin and Ethereum. So proof of work is where you have a number of competitors to verify a transaction, whereas proof of stake doesn't have that. So the carbon needed for proof of stake is massively reduced. So again, I think if you were thinking about how to use blockchain to work on your particular issue, you know, if it was something around supply chain, it would be thinking about, you know, how does that kind of transaction verification process work in the instance of you're using kind of blockchain in that way, you know, and having that climate friendly approach from the start, you know, which I know is something that we've all been writing about a lot for the last month or so on Charity Digital, and about having, you know, whether you're a climate related organization or not, it's about having those climate justice principles built into everything that you do.
Yeah, certainly, I agree with that. So we have got a few more. I'm just cautious of the time. We've got 5 minutes, but we'll definitely get a couple more in. So Kirsten's asked, would you say Bing is better than ChatGPT as it's connected to the internet, or doesn't this really matter? I guess it depends on what you're using an LLM for.
So yeah, I agree with you. I think it depends what you're using it for. When I spoke to Tim Todhunter at Crohn's and Colitis, he said that they'd found the new Bing very useful for research, because unlike ChatGPT, which is you know, a chatbot and will give you kind of a text-based response, Bing can also kind of signpost you to the different places where it's finding information. So from a research perspective, they found it a lot more useful. So it, you know, exactly as Kirsten says, it depends what you're using it for.
Sure, makes sense. Uses for both. And then this one's come in anonymously, but for grant applications, I can see there becoming a great divide between the charities who have the time and skills to learn and use AI to support grant applications versus those who are not able to for whatever reason. Difficult to know which way funders will support. Many small charities have one part-time staff member covering all things fundraising. Hard to keep up despite excellent webinars like today. So I guess maybe this person is asking how can you keep up if you are kind of a one-person team, or you don't have the time to invest as much time in learning AI? What would be the first steps, I guess, in using it for grant applications?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think both Diane Hall and Ian McClintock were so passionate about this being a game changer for small charities, you know, and I know how much frustration there is out there from writing a piece on bureaucracy in the sector, how much frustration there is around the bureaucracy of applications and reporting on grants. And you know, both of them were real advocates of using AI as a first draft tool. So using ChatGPT as a first draft tool, understanding all of the things that a grant giver would want to know, a funder would want to know, putting those through ChatGPT and asking it in a prompt to produce you an output in the format that the grant that the funder requires. So I think with all AI, getting started is about testing. You know, I think testing straight away, and the more you test, the more you'll kind of learn how useful it can be for you, and sort of save time. Charity Excellence has a prompts library. If you're not sure about how to prompt ChatGPT around funding bids, do check that out. And I think Diane Hall's webinar on you know, how to use AI in funding bids would also be a great place to start. But I mean, yes, webinars are great, but you've got to get out there and just do it and start testing. And that's very much what Tim Todhunter had to say as well. Just start testing. The only thing it can do is save you time.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it, where it may take a little bit of time to learn, but actually eventually it will save you time. So it's kind of important to invest the time initially to get the best juice out of it.
Exactly. And three experts have told me that ChatGPT will produce you a great first draft of a funding application. So I'd start there.
Sounds like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah.
And all those resources that Helen has mentioned will be shared post-webinar in an email, as well as the slides, so you can look back on all of those case studies that Helen shared today. That is all we've got time for. There are a few more questions, but we have run out of time today. So thank you so much, Helen, for that really insightful presentation and answers to all of those questions as well today. So we do appreciate your feedback for all of our webinars. I think the link to the feedback form has been posted in the chat. So if you do have a spare few minutes to fill that in now, we would really appreciate it. But it will also be included in the follow-up email as well. So look out for that. And then our next webinar, which will be on the future of non-profit marketing, preparing for AI, will be on the 8th of June. So another in the AI series. So if you enjoyed this one, I'm sure you will enjoy the next one as well. So we hope to see you there. And thank you all for joining. And thanks again to you, Helen.
Thanks so much, everyone. It was really great to have this conversation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.